Hello, welcome to the Great Games in Najdorf, and this time we'll be looking at Fischer game against Unzicker played in 1962. A great game underlining the importance of active pieces. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, and of course a6. Bishop e2. We again have the classical main line, e5, knight b3, and here Fischer played bishop e6, which is considered to be a dubious move. Later it was established that bishop e7 is more accurate, so bishop e6 and castle. Well, f4 is interesting on bishop e6, and on queen c7 g4 is very strong. But Unzicker played castle, knight bd7, f4, queen c7. Queen c7's idea, of course, is to keep the c4 square under control in case of f5, which was played in the game and which is main plan. But in the mid-1970s, a4 was played, bishop e7, and king h1. One of the Guller's main idea, and it was played in match Karpov-Polugaevsky. So let's get back to the game. Queen c7, f5, and bishop c4. a4, bishop e7. Here we take a little moment and talk about rook c8, which was played in Galler-Najdorf, candidates 1953. But it is important to remember that we should keep the rook on a file, because after bishop c4, queen c4, a5, knight e4 is no good after rook a4, and black loses the piece. So black should really keep the rook on a8, because after a5, black needs b5, so that a6 pawn is defended with the rook on a8. Bishop e7, bishop e3, and castle. Unzicker played a5. Well, a critical alternative is to play g4, but here black has a typical breakthrough in the center, d5, ed5, knight b6. Now the d5 pawn is in trouble, so white has to give up the dark squared bishop, bishop b6, queen b6, king h1. Black has to take the knight on b3, cb3, and h6, and we see that all dark squares are controlled by black, and he dominates on dark squares. Rook a d8 is the plan, and d5 pawn is also not so strong. So castle and a5. And the idea I've mentioned before, b5, escaping the bind. A b6, knight b6, and here Unzicker chose a very dubious move, bishop b6. Of course, king h1 is better, and other rook comes to c8, bishop b6, queen b6, bishop c4 is met with rook c4, queen e2, rook c8, and if rook a2, here actually it's important to know that this knight on b3 is really bad. Rook a2 white plays because of doubling the rook on a file and puts pressure on a6, and sometimes knight can jump on a5. But in this particular moment, the bishop on e7 is not doing anything, so bishop d8 is a great idea, and after rook f a1, the idea of bishop d8 was that queen b7, and now the bishop comes to b6 and controls the dark squares. On bishop d8, knight a5 is not such a big deal after rook b4, highlighting the weakness of b2 pawn and c3 knight. So let's get back to the game. Knight b6, bishop b6, queen b6, and king h1. And here Fischer played a great move, a very strong move with a brilliant idea. Bishop b5. The idea of bishop b5 is bishop c6 and a5. So it kind of forces white to exchange on b5, because any other move after bishop c6, also attacking the e4 pawn, black is just very, very fine. So bishop b5 was played in the game. Knight b5 was better. A b5 and queen d3, attacking the b5 pawn and also defends the e4 pawn. Well, with opposite colored bishop, but of course black has no problems here. So bishop b5, a b5, and knight d5. A very important moment. After knight d5, queen d5, one might think that this bishop on e7 is very bad, defends the d6 pawn, and white has domination on light squares. But look at the knight on b3. It's really, really very bad. If it was on c3, then white has a clear advantage, controlling the d5 square and also attacking the b5, but knight is so badly placed on b3 that I think black is very, very fine in this position. But at this particular moment, black has a very strong move which was played in the game, and after the next move, which is rook a4, white has to be extremely cautious. Rook a4, ba4 is of course in black's favor, and rook a4, the idea is queen a6, rook a8, getting the a file. c3, queen a6. Now it's really hard for white to suggest any plan, but for example, on rook a d1, rook c8 and knight c1, so knight wants to improve its position, b4. Black has a great initiative on queen side, and after knight d3, bc3, bc3, rook c3, it's just very bad for white. After knight e5, a kind of tactical moment because of de. And we can see that there is no mate after queen d8 because black has bishop f8 always. But there is queen e5 attacking the rook on c3 and the bishop on e7. But black has counterattack with, first of all, defending the c3 rook, and after queen c3 with the idea of bishop c3. Rook d8 mate. There is a counterattack with queen f1. Rook f1, bishop c3, and black is winning. So, queen a6. And of course white here has big problems. And I think black is very fine in this position. But there was a very, very interesting idea found by Hübner to play g3 with the idea of meeting bishop g5 with h4 and having an escape square for king on h3. Queen a8, queen a8, rook a8, and king g2. Now king comes to f3, probably draw. Well, black of course is very fine, but white should not have problems to defend this endgame also. Queen a6 and Unzicker played h3 to have a luft for the king, but after rook c8, rook fe1, just protecting the e4 pawn, a very nice handy luft, h6, king h2, and now it's time to activate our bishop on e7. Bishop g5, threatening checks at some point. So at this point I think that Unzicker got afraid of bishop f4 and played g3, but it's really fatal, weakening. Queen a7, a great move, attacking the f2 square right away. Well, actually, instead of g3, white could play rook ad1, but after b4 there are problems again for white, so queen d3 doesn't give anything after queen c6, and rook ed1 is met by queen d6, queen b6, sorry. And the idea of it is that if white takes on d6, bishop f4, king h1, queen d6, rook d6, and rook e4. This bishop is really good on f4, and look at this knight, very, very weak on b3. Rook d5, rook e2, attacking the b2 pawn, rook b1 and b4 with a huge advantage for black. So bishop g5, g3 and queen a7. Here white is already in trouble. After rook g1, rook takes a1, knight should take on a1 and b4, for example. White cannot take on b4 because of rook c1, and on rook c1, queen f2, king h1, queen f3, king h2, and bishop c1. White is lost here. The knight simply on a1 is trapped. So after queen a7, white played king g2. And another active move, rook a2. Attacks the b2 pawn. And black sets a little trick for white, because after the next move, which was played in the game, king f1, the final blunder, rook c3. bc3 is not possible because of queen f2 mate. So rook c3, rook a2 doesn't help because of intermediate check. On f3, king e2, rook f2, king d3, and now queen a2. Completely winning position for black. Instead of king f1, there is nothing much to say, but if white tries to take on a2 first and take on b5, then queen takes b2, rook takes e2, queen takes c3. Black has just extra pawn. This knight on b3 is still out of play. h4, bishop e3, rook a2, and king h7. Winning for black. And if rook a2, queen d3, then simple rook b2, rook e2, rook e2, queen e2, queen c7 wins, because white cannot defend on c3. So, as I mentioned, king f1 was played in the game, and after rook c3, Unzicker resigned. I hope you enjoyed the game. Thank you for watching.